Weirding Way Media.
Welcome to episode 103 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning here talking to you from not home but the east of England, Norwich to be precise. I'm up here visiting my parents. What films have been shot here? 45 Years, Andrew Haig's great film. Avengers Age of Ultron, I think there was some of that here. Never Let Me Go. Stardust, Atonement, Die Another Day. Full Metal Jacket, where the Norfolk Broads doubled as paddy fields in Asia. The Dam Busters, parts of all those films anyway, were shot in this county. And in fact, the latest film that today's guest worked on, parts of it was also shot here. More on that in a moment. Thanks to all of you that now support the podcast via Patreon. If you're one of the several thousand people that don't support the podcast, but do listen to the podcast, may I just make this a short plea to donate basically a tenner in the UK, just over a tenner, to support the podcast for an entire year. I really do need your support. This takes several days a month to make 2 episodes. They are days that I'm not working in my normal freelance world, so I need to kind of earn the equivalent. So I know there are quite a few thousand of you listening to this out there. Despite this looking and sounding like a reasonably big podcast, I hope it does, it really is just me and my laptop here. So if I can't make it financially viable soon, I'm just going to, listen, it's not going to get to that stage because I love doing it and I know you want to do the right thing. If you are listening to this and you enjoy my work, just consider, throwing a tenner at me, $12. That will cover for a whole year's worth of episodes, at least 24 episodes. Right, enough of the begging. Okay, back to today's episode. For my guest on this second episode of May 2024, it's production designer Nathan Crowley. Now, if you don't know his name, I mean, you should, but you'll definitely know and most likely love his work. I'll just list a few films here from his IMDb. Behind Enemy Lines, Insomnia, Batman Begins, The Prestige, The Dark Knight, John Carter, The Dark Knight Rises, Interstellar, Dunkirk, The Greatest Showman, First Man, Tenet, Wonka. Nathan is an incredibly talented artist that is able to create these amazing worlds on screen. He's also a great guy and very easy to talk with. And we had a great conversation just a couple of weeks ago now. Might have been last week, actually. I think it was last week. It's a very fluid conversation, but we do cover some of the milestones in his career, starting with a Spielberg film and finishing up with his latest film that I mentioned above, the part of which was shot in Norfolk. With some chat about Chris Nolan films in between, of course. I mean, you couldn't miss those off of his filmography. So here's my chat with production designer Nathan Crowley, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Nathan, can you trace back the moment in your life when you decided, I want to be involved with movies, or I want to be a designer, or was there another path that you took?
Yeah, I came to it sort of very randomly and haphazardly. I can trace exactly the moment when I realized this is where I wanted to be. And that was my very first film. I got hired as a junior set designer, which is a draftsman, on Hook, my very first job. And I walked into what used to be the old MGM studios, which at that time were Columbia, TriStar, and is now Sony. And I walked through the main gates, and I walked past, I think it was stage 27 or 30, which is one of the big old MGM stages, and looked in the door, and there was all this water rushing out of the stage. There was a ship the size of HMS Victory having been built on that stage, and they built a tank and they were trying to float it. And then there was chaos, and there were people running around, and carpenters and painters and scenics and camera people. And they realized the way the ship had welded itself to the stage floor, and they couldn't get buoyancy off it. I mean,
Huh.
and it was just one of those sort of. I realized I just suddenly these are my people, because they were trying to do something just sort of fantastical. And no one's built a ship. You only get to build HMS Victory once.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
and so I realized it's like, oh wow, this is exciting. And I mean, I've been on a different path. I'd studied fine arts at John Cass for a year, which is I think it's gone now. The art school was in Aldgate East, or Whitechapel. It was opposite Whitechapel Art Gallery. And then I'd gone to Brighton Art School, or as part of the Polytechnic back then, to study interior architecture, which is a sort of collective for 3D everything. So, and I'd worked. I could always draw. My father was an architect, so I learned to draft. And I could always get jobs in architecture firms, but it's something I really didn't want to do. I guess I thought after Sir John Cass I wanted to sculpt, but was a bit concerned that I'd never make any money. So I went down to Brighton, and I'd always been on this path, and I got a job out of Brighton for architects. And then, this was in the end of the 80s, and then Black Monday hit, and I just bought myself a flat in Clapham and borrowed to the hill as one of these, having got my first job, and interest rates doubled, and suddenly there was no work, and so I was one of those. I would say the end of the Maggie Thatcher era, where we came out, no jobs, no money, sent the keys back to the mortgage company. I was one of those people,
Wow.
and got on a plane. I had friends who were in LA, and so I just went off to LA, because everything had gone wrong, and I started working. I started illustrating for some architects there in LA. I had a lot of friends who'd moved there, because the thing about the end of the Thatcher era, that a lot of our generation had gone abroad, because there was nothing left. So that, it's funny. A lot of my friends went to Australia. Australia was easier because it was they had the sort of under 30 visas. America was harder because it's harder to get visas. But so I went there, and I just happened to. I literally went into a bar opposite Paramount Studios called Smalls, which was what used to be a famous bar. It's probably, I don't know if it's still there. And bumped into a guy I was Brighton with called Joe Hodges, who, and so it's like we had a drink, and he said, "I remember you. You used to build crazy furniture and at art school." And he said they're looking for draftspeople up here at the on Hook. I'll see if I can get you an interview. So he did, and I walked in, and then I just haphazard. I didn't know you could get jobs in film. It didn't seem like. Growing up in London, film seemed like you'd have to be a member of the royal family to get in.
Yeah,
So,
and I guess there was that sort of, if it is a word, nepotistic side thing as well, where and rightly so. It happens with butchers, it happens with bakers. Why
yeah,
not in the film industry? But it is one of those industries that people are kind of desperate to get into, and I think people I've spoken to, like through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, have often said, "Oh, it was my uncle, or it was my father, or it was my grandfather, or my father did a favor for somebody who worked in the industry, and they brought me in as a kid." And so to get in, without one of those tickets was quite something, wasn't it? Really?
yeah. I mean, but I didn't really know. I mean, I'd sort of gone to art, so and I was thinking I would just need to get a job. So drafting for architects seemed to be. I didn't want to be an architect, but I was a bit lost to be, but we all have to work. And so I think, I didn't really understand that there was an art department, and there, it was actually something that, they hired people for who
Yeah.
did an array of things. And so going to LA, where, hanging out with these friends and working a bit. It was very cheap in LA back then. It was like, there was no bills. Rent was dirt cheap. So it was like a third the price of London. So it was, it's not like that anymore. And, and then, so it seemed like the obvious thing to do. It's sunny. Didn't have to wear socks. And so, yeah, I just fell into it. And then when I walked into that studio, I knew immediately that I'd found something I want to do. It was Norman Garwood hired me, the designer who did Brazil, and The Princess Bride. Everyone's a fan of that. So he was great. He said, "Yeah, they give you a shot." The good thing about America is they give everyone a chance. You don't have to be a family member or don't have to have the connection. They give you a chance. So if you fail, they kick you out. They're very sort of blunt that way. Like, if you're any good, they keep you.
Do you think being a Brit carried a bit of a cachet then as well for people? Like, I always get this thing for Americans. They think there's this certain level of sophistication of a British man or a British woman, like in the industry. I get it all the time. When I travel, people hear that accent, and well, maybe not since Brexit, but do you think there was a bit of that then as well? That
definitely. You show up and they think, they think you know more than you do. Which is often the case. The truth is that they know much more than we do. We just have this accent and we speak well, providing they can understand you.
But also you bring something different, don't you? Because you've been brought up somewhere completely different to them, which is ultimately alien to them, yet you still have this shared language. So, I think just being in that situation, sort of being thrown into a big... I mean, you're on a Spielberg film day one, right?
Yeah.
Did you feel... like a fish out of water?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Norman hired me, and it's sink or swim culture, and it's like, he said, the art director, Tom Sanders, who I worked for he became a designer very shortly after that. They threw me in on Tinkerbell's oversized, her sets had to be oversized because she was a fairy size. So we had to build everything huge, so that dealt with scale. And of course, I'd been trained in metric and I had to switch to imperial. So I really had to I had to knuckle down and get on with it. And, but it was, it was definitely, I think, I'd always, this sort of realization has come up over me quite recently that I realize I think in 3 dimensions. And I always thought everyone thought and can imagine in 3 dimensions. So if you're talking about a space, I can open a wall, go through it, and I can change something. I can spin around it in my head. But I had no idea for a long time that everyone didn't have that ability to change things 3-dimensionally in their brain. And that was and I realized that starting in Hook was like, I can see this side of the ship. I can see where it is. I don't have to be in front of it. So
it's interesting, isn't it, when you have that realization that you can do things that other people can't do, because we do kind of grow up in that school system where sort of everyone's roughly on a par, right? There's somebody slightly better than you, somebody slightly worse than you, or maybe you're at the top. But I remember, I think George Lucas said something like he was amazed the first time he met somebody who had no imagination whatsoever. Like he couldn't believe that somebody like that existed, It just kind of shocked him. So it is a bit of a sort of an epiphany moment, isn't it? And also being able to identify it as an advantage that can then take you on this path. I mean, the next thing that appears, I think, on your IMDb is Deep Space Nine, which of course is a huge series. So you've gone from a Spielberg movie to a huge franchise.
Actually,
or was there something in between?
Yeah, I didn't get credit for it, but I spent 11 months on Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Did you? Yeah.
And Norman, walked next door to Dante Ferretti, the designer, and Coppola was just starting up Bram Stoker's Dracula. And he said to me, "You don't know anyone here?" I said, "Nope." And he goes, "I'll go and get you a job next door. They're making Dracula," and he did.
Wow.
So I have him to really thank, and Joe Hodges. And he went to Dante, and I was hard in Dante's art department. And Dante unfortunately left the film and the art department was sort of cleared out. So in the interim, I was put with second unit and Roman Coppola. So we did all the second unit stuff. So I spent 11 months on second unit, which was the best, literally the best film school I could ever imagine, because it was all in-camera practical effects.
Yeah, right.
And so I actually learned how to make films for those 11 months. It was a massively intense course. So if you remember the opening sequence, that was all ours, and all the shadows and the moving shadows and the hydraulics and the upside down rats and the peppers ghosting and the wolves in the circus tent. And that was all. We were off in second unit. Sort of. I mean, it was at the time I had no idea how lucky I just got, and I do put it down to luck to get a job on Hook as your first film, and then to go into second unit Bram Stoker's. Because I still use all those in-camera effects today. So
it's interesting you say the word luck, because it comes into so many conversations I've had with people who've been in the film industry over the years. But it's also something about just being open to those opportunities, isn't it? Like, you've arrived in this new country, you're amongst new people, some friends you do know, you've found your way into this industry, and it's just, I think some people just don't see opportunity. This is a conclusion I've come to over the years, that some people, they may be offered the opportunity and they may turn it down because they're fearful of it. They may not even recognize it as an opportunity and seek something else out instead. You know, they're trying to leapfrog to the next stage, when really, you know, like you said, to be on a film like that, you know, in a film school with an amazing director. I mean, I think of, like, you know, imagine, like, I can't even imagine, like, working alongside, like, Iko Ishioka, like the costume designer and stuff. Just like one of the most iconic designers in the world. Just blows your mind.
Well, I mean, it was really an enlightened time for me, because it was like I found the right place. Bram Stoker's Dracula, they wanted to do in camera, which I didn't realize was everything to me, because, you know, it's full of tricks, and it's interesting, and it's more fun, you know. So,
and it's set you on a path, hasn't it? Let's face it, really.
Totally. That film sent me, and I was terrified of Francis Ford Coppola, as you would be if you were 23 or 24.
Yeah, well,
and but it's funny, we actually had a long meeting about Megalopolis a few years ago, and it was like I felt like I closed a circle, because it was like I could finally talk to him on you know, on an equal level. Although I'm not sure I would ever be equal, but at least I could suggest things that he hadn't thought of. So it was
nice.
It was a nice circle to close. But that film, you're right. It's luck. The luck is Norman asking me, "Hey, do you want me to get you a job?" You know? That's where it ends, because it's like, and you're right, you have to fall into it. I mean, it's much easier at that age, because you've got nothing to lose, you know. So, I mean, you really, what's the alternatives? Go back to England and, you know, get in there with John Major.
Yeah. You made the right decision.
and young Michael Patella and whatever, you know. You don't want to, you know, those were dark days, as they were over Brexit recently. I hadn't seen those sort of dark days until recently, I think, in England. But yeah, so the opportunity was there, and then you really got to get on with it. And if someone tells you got to do something, you got to figure out how to do it. And so
were you in the union straight off the bat there? Like, once you'd done Hook and stuff, did you manage to get in the union at that point?
Yeah, well, they could only harm me because the Universal lot had burned down. That was not this last time, the time before. And they'd hired all the draftsmen off the union lists. And so it was open. They were accepting new people. Yeah. So I not only got a job on Hook, but the production manager got me in the union at the same time. So the fortune of that is immense.
Crazy.
Which is IATSE Local 800, which it's such a good, strong union. But and they paid well, which was like the other shocking thing. I still remember going to make my deal with a producer, and I won't tell you who, and he was like, "I'm just going to pay you union scale. I don't want to hear it. Don't say a word." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm totally happy." Sorry, there's a big dog barking. Can you hear that dog?
No, I can't. No.
Okay. No, so I went in to see the the producer, and he was really, I didn't even say a word, and he was saying, "You're only going to get scale, union scale. Don't complain. I don't want to hear a word." And I said, "That's fine. I don't really care. I just want a job."
Yeah, yeah.
And then they tell me how much it is, and I was like, "Really?" And I was thinking, "That's amazing." It's not like earning a month in a week. 1 week there was a month in London, and I went to my friend Joe Hodges and said, "I can't believe you guys get paid this money." And he goes, "I don't get paid that. I get paid, because that was scale." So,
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I mean, things have changed, unfortunately, but I did like the fact that, it was a living wage. Uh,
Yes.
and I think I was probably 24 actually, as a young person, a young man or a young person, you got to get a living wage. You got to pay your rent and your bills and have some
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
Um,
Sounds like you were in the sweet spot there with LA being pretty cheap at the time, work
yeah,
being fairly plentiful. I mean, and also just feeling that you're valued. I mean, I've worked
yeah,
for some big clients over the years and they scrimp and save to the point where, I'm now thinking, can I continue to live doing what I do? Because, they now want to go to the new generation and pay them nothing.
yeah. Which
And
is like, it's like, come on, guys, like we can afford to pay young kids a decent wage. So it's like, I grew up as in a Quaker family, so we were all, quite liberal setting. But anyway, yeah. So I was thrown into second unit, and I had to produce all these sets out of whatever I could get my hands on. And so in those days they had scene docs. So if I needed 10 poles or something, I could go down and figure out a bunch of columns I could add to from the scene doc. And they still had the old studio system. So you had the carpentry shop, the metal shop, the graphic shop, all in a line. So you go place to place and you try and put
wow.
a set together, and they have the drapery department. That's all gone now. But it was very good, the studio system, because you could go down the line in the warehouses, and get what you needed and then get some crew and assemble it.
Like
And
a well-oiled
I mean,
machine, yeah.
yeah, it was great. I mean, it literally after, I think they were just dismantling it in the next 10 years. They even had a scenic department with the big rollers where they paint the
Mm,
backings.
mm.
I mean, it was kind of a magical moment where I got to experience the old Hollywood system just before it disappeared. Um, I mean, there was odd days like they'd call me in because I was second unit and say, "Oh, we need to do a photo shoot down on stage 15 with the actresses. Can you go down and bring some scenery?" So I'd go and get some walls. The grips would move it because that was their job once it's been
Yeah.
filmed. And you go down there, it was like Helmut Newton was taking the photos. So, and he was like, it was like, "This is mad." I'm standing next to Helmut Newton saying, "What do you need?"
Crazy, isn't it? It's
And
bonkers to be in those situations and also to sort of realize that you're a part of it now. Like,
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure
and
there are people like around you now who are starting out and going, Jesus, it's Nathan Crowley. He did this, he did
yeah.
that. He worked for
I
Chris
mean, it was
Nolan.
like, yeah. It was like, yeah, it was really. So I'm sort of feel the best thing I ever did was send the keys of my flat back to the mortgage company.
Yeah.
So,
Who thought that could be a positive move? Do you know what I mean? It's like on
yeah, I
paper,
mean, I
it's like
have
the
to
end of
say, Meg,
something, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. So really, the question is, should I be thanking Maggie Thatcher?
No, let's not go there. Let's not go that far. What is the sort of distinction between art director and production designer? Because I'm actually making a documentary at the moment, and if I'd like to actually invite to come and interview you at some point. I'm doing a
Yeah,
documentary about Joe Alves, the production designer who worked on
yeah,
Jaws and Close Encounters for
yeah,
Spielberg. Um, Joe's got this amazing archive of stuff. Like
yeah. I bet.
he's got everything, like even stuff before he started, and he sort of went up through the ranks, and he was art director and then he was production designer. But I've never really got my hands on what the difference is, or is it just a sort of renaming of the role because it started to encompass more than it did before?
Yeah. So yes. So the old term for production designer in the studio system was art director, or in Cedric Gibbons' day, supervising art director. Um, and then he had art directors under him. And so the art director used to be, so if you look at old credits from the 60s, you'll see, when you see production designer, you'll see art director. And essentially that's a production designer. Now, the difference now, and then the assistant art directors are now the art directors. So, and that title was brought forward because I think it was Menzies or someone, he took on more because effects suddenly became practical effects first, and then slowly films change from the sort of studio production system of you go to stage, you go to the back lot, and you revolve. Instead you were trying to find out different ways of how to do things. You were sort of reinventing practical effects, and you had to do it in the art department. And then eventually visual effects came in and special effects and took over. I mean, special effects were always there, but they were like explosions and fires and bullets,
Yeah.
So production design sort of became this thing, and the reason it's called production because it's this sort of overseeing of this arm of several different departments. So under me is set deck, props, construction, and with construction you get all the metal shops, the plasterers, the painters, the scenics, and then we have to govern location. We don't run their department, but we need to be with them to decide, because you're trying to figure out the look of the whole film, which is the environment it's set in or the world you're trying to create and all its themes. You have to run visually all these other departments. You don't have to manage them, but you visually have to run them. And to a certain extent, I like to run visually special effects because a lot of those big rigs we build to move sets. Like if you're turning a set, I want to know how we're going to turn it. I want to tell them how I want it to move, or the floor moves, or, you want to. And then with visual effects, you have to inform them what everything should look like because you're often gone. And you have to, so it's this sort of umbrella of all these departments that, we take on. And we are responsible for the entire, environment design of everything. So obviously the cinematographer deals with all the lighting, and that's a major thing. Like we don't have anything to do with the costumes, but we have to interact with them. And then the CG world is a new, relatively new thing. But if you're doing it in camera, you need to talk to the scenics, you need to talk to special effects because you might have a moving backing, you might have a spinning backing, or so everything has to be built into the set or into the location. So then if you go on location, which you do quite often with Chris, I'll go and grow. Like we grew 500 acres of corn for Interstellar. So I'll go with locations. We go and find a farmer, and then it's like, you learn how to grow corn, which I think is sort of exciting because you go and sit with the farmer, you get involved in his life, and then you go to agriculture school for a week or on and off, and you learn a bit, and then you try and plant it. And you're asking him to do it, but the process of being outside and interacting with everyone is I find it exciting, So
well, I was going to be my question. Do you prefer the control of the studio environment where you've kind of, you've planned it down to the nth degree, or do you like that kind of outdoors location scouting, picking a location and kind of working within the parameters of that location, and maybe finding something that you wouldn't find elsewhere?
Yeah, I kind of like both. I think combining both is the ultimate. Like on Wicked that we just finished, I grew 9 million tulips in Norfolk with a farmer called Mark. Yeah,
whereabouts in Norfolk? Because my mum and dad are up there. I'm just interested to know.
Yeah, it's right on the Leicester border.
Right.
Right in that nook, not near the Chelsea tractor area. What's that called? The Hokum. It's further north than that, just around. But I wanted to build it right. I shouldn't really say that, but you know what I'm saying.
I do.
Hopefully you don't live in
Hokum. No, I don't. I'm not one of those people. Yeah, the affluent SUV gang. Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. So we found a farmer who's a flower farmer, and he knew the field. I needed I need the end, no trees because it's Munchkin land. Munchkin Aussian trees aren't like our trees. They're circular, just in case you're wondering. And And so I need no trees. I need it to be right on the wash there, so I could have big skies and tulips. And so Mark, a lot of his crown, weirdly, this is what you learn. A lot of his crown land. So you've got to meet the crown estates who actually are pretty good helping out. Then you got to plant these things, and so it's a big deal. But it was exciting to go through the winter and see everything grow. And the farmer Mark used to send me videos of in this horrific weather up there, and he of him like keeping an eye on all the tulips. I mean, 9 million, all different colors. So we sort of planted the whole lot, and it was just. And then you build the back lot, you build the Munchkin Village on the back lot, and then to achieve the stitch, visual effects. Pablo, who you probably know, has to stitch
Pablo
these
Hellman,
things together. Yeah. So
I know Pablo. Yeah.
So actually, weirdly, John Chu came up with the idea of sinking the village into the landscape, which means when you're running towards it, you don't see it, and then you suddenly it's revealed to you.
Right.
And
nice.
and then we could ramp back up in the back lot, and we could get the reveal, and then Pablo had to stitch them into the aerial, and so it was like that's exciting. And I mean, the question is obviously asked like, well, why don't we do CG tulips? And it's like, because it's not the same. I think the audience can touch reality, and they just move differently.
I think I saw one a line I like that you gave in an interview I saw yesterday. I was watching. With CGI, you were saying with CGI, we go there when we realize when we've worked out what we can't do. If we can do it practically, we'll do it practically, which I think is great, because I think, and I don't want to talk down VFX at all, because I know a lot of people that are very skilled in that area and do some really great work, but at the end of the day, it is just a tool, isn't it, to achieve something? I mean, obviously budget comes into it, all sorts of aspects come into it, but there is something about that tangible reaching out and touching, not only for the audience, but I'm sure for the actors on set as well, to be able to interact with their environment. And your work as well, I often think that one of the things that your work isn't necessarily in the public consciousness, because it's supposed to disappear, your work, right? You're not necessarily supposed to notice it, but one of the things it does, of course, that a lot of people don't realize, I think, is that it can inform character so much. I just think immediately of like Joe Alves' work, like building Quint's shack suddenly, and the boat, making this ridiculous boat. Suddenly you know who that character is, along with the performance and everything. Your work is really foundational for so many things, and also it's kind of a sandwich, isn't it? Production design in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. It's like, the other thing is, sometimes if we're lucky, we get to create our own reality. That means if you're doing fantasy, if you create something and everyone believes that's reality now, that's what this looks like, so, which is like, take TARS in Interstellar, like the robot TARS, is like to find a shape, robot design has been across the board. And so to find something that would fit his character was very difficult. So, you get to do all these wondrous things, and then the actors come in, and then if you build it for real, or you build as much of it as you can, or go to a height, they get in character and they feel it, and I can see it on them. They like change in the reality. And so if you give them, like the wizard's head, we just did the puppeteered head was all puppeteered and mechanical, and it could express itself and could come out and talk to our actresses, and you could scare them as well. And I am Oz, this 15-foot giant head through these curtains, with an eye, so, and then when they come in, they're in awe of it, and I feel like it helps them with performance. And then, of course, I mean, the joy of visual effects is we can now do stuff we couldn't do, or they can fill in the gaps. So if which is everything is a tool. So, I mean, you spoke to Pablo, like Pablo needs real photography to inform his visual effects. So it's like, and there lies the foundation of practical set building. Is if we can build enough to inform the visual effects, then it's going to look better. So the join is going to be good. If you can take the join lines up to 35 feet on a backlot, it's tricky. And with that comes cost, because the higher you go, the more expensive it is. So, there's all these factors that play in. But yeah, visual effects is a tool, and you're a team. Like visual effects, special effects, art department, construction, we're all a team. We all have to get on to make it better. And it's all, I just had the fun between Wonka and Wicked. I had the funnest fantasy. I haven't done anything like these kind of films since Hook and Bram Stoker's Dracula. So I feel like I've sort of returned to the beginning, which is, I mean, I've no complaints about the middle thing with Chris Nolan, because we did some amazing things.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about Tars a moment ago. I mean, such a ballsy design. I mean, I remember the first time I saw that, and I just instantly said, that's brilliant, because A, I'd never seen it before, and B, initially you think it makes no sense, and then you see it move and you just go, oh my God, it makes perfect sense. Because the thing is about design, I guess, I mean, I'm preaching to the converted here, obviously, but, for me, the thing about design is not every piece of design is cohesive in our world. Like, I look around me now and there's things that don't really work, and things that are really cool and sleek, and things that are clunky. And that's what I've always loved about your work. It doesn't feel like it's just, here's a world that feels like it was created by somebody. It feels like a world that's created by lots of people, as in the world that we live in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's not Future World, as I call it.
Yeah. I was thinking like James Klein's work in The Creator recently. Like, there's some really cool tech in there, and then they've got those stupid, massive, big translator things that are like a giant Game Boy, and you kind of go, well, that's a bit... Well, actually, yeah, there is really shit design around, and you kind of put up with it, don't you? We still haven't made a good toaster yet, let's face it.
That's funny. I never thought about that.
Like hotel toasters, they don't work.
Yeah.
I actually had a Formula One guy say that to me once. He came up to me at a hotel. He was a McLaren guy, and he said, all this design, and we can't even get a toaster to work properly. He said, well, it is faster. He said, it is faster than our car, though.
That sounds like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy comment. You know what I mean?
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's like,
I've been reading a bit of Douglas Adams to my daughter, actually, so maybe it's seeped in there. Yeah, because really your job is about convincing people that the characters are living in that world. Well,
and as you said, I call it, we have to go silently into these films. And if you don't notice us and you accept it, then I think we've done our job. And now there's obviously many schools of design. Some believe you have to show off. That's a unfortunate word, because that would be glamorous in some way, or maybe the story suits that. But when I'm trying to convince someone that there's a robot and that we're on the Ranger and we're about to go through a wormhole that's somewhere around Saturn, I kind of I've got to try.
You've got to be all in, haven't you? Yeah.
Well, and there's danger to it. I can't have a robot that's going to solve all your problems, So, and also, I mean, one of the cleverest thing we did, and I say we because I'm always working with Chris from very early on the design, is all the spaceships we put NASA. We put NASA colors on them, the black and white and the tiles, and all the shuttle. We made them feel like the shuttle. So you're looking at the Ranger, and it's got two horns, and it's sleek and it's wide. It's docking with a space station, the Endurance. There's these pods. There's also a clock. There's lots of themes in there, and you got the lander, but they all look like NASA because they've all got the heat tiles and the white, they've got that white top surface on. They've got NASA windows with the framing to make them airtight. And so hopefully you kind of accept it. You go, as an audience member, you just sort of you just go with it, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. Is it's like we've we've got to get you to a black hole and eventually to the Tesseract, so we have to get you there.
Yeah.
With
It feels, yeah, you're
without
right
it,
though. It feels like an evolution of what you already know, doesn't it? It's, yeah,
yeah.
you kind of
It's
accept it as,
it's
oh, that's where we've got to by this point. Yeah.
it's also, I guess, the word is nostalgia.
Mm,
You have a memory or a nostalgia of it, and if you can tap into that as a designer, it's like it allows the audience to just go with you. And now, a lot of designers don't agree with that. They want to hit you with something completely new and throw it in your face and want to knock your socks off. Which
mm.
that's the brilliant thing about design. There is no sort of right or wrong.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I can understand that to a certain extent, working as a sort of gun for hire, as you know, you were saying
yeah,
before we were recording. You want your work to stand out to future employers, but you also have to serve the story and do that
yeah,
part of the job as well. That must be a really sort of difficult balancing act.
yeah. What kind? I mean, never really felt like that. I've always sort of had this massive naive optimism.
Well, that's great.
That is like, oh yeah, no, I think that started from going to LA and going into a bar and getting a job,
Yeah.
and I feel like, yeah, something will show up, and I'm touch wood. So, um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess I bumped into some great directors along the way, and who I've worked with, who I continue to work with, and it's been a pretty great journey. So hopefully there's more of it.
Yeah. Well, am I right in saying that I read somewhere that you knew of Chris Nolan when you were a kid? Like, did you grow up near each other or
Yeah,
something?
I was in Islington, and he grew up in Highgate. I didn't When we first met. We had no idea. He was on Bishop's Road. I was down on Thempton Street, which probably means nothing to most people. But
I know where they are. Yeah.
my best friend Austin lived two doors down from the Nolans, but Chris was 5 years younger than us. So so we were there. We were always at Austin's house, and who would know that the kid next door, who's 5 years younger than us, was Chris Nolan. So
Oh,
we knew of his older brother, but his older brother when we were teenagers liked to thump people, so we used to stay away from him.
you avoided him. That's fair
Yeah.
enough. It's funny though that you sort of came out of similar stables and then crossed your paths again all those
Well,
years later.
the end of my street in Islington was the puppet theatre where Joe Wright was a baby when we were teenagers. So he was 5 years younger as well. And his dad used to run the puppet theatre, which was brilliant. I used to go there as a kid.
Yeah,
Uh, and he was down the road there. I mean, you just don't know these things. You sort of,
yeah.
yeah.
I remember when I
And
first met my wife, who lived in Crouch End, and I came out of her front door one morning and walked up the road, and I just said morning to this guy, and I thought, oh, I know him, and it was Simon Pegg. And then I went into Budgeon's, and Peter Capaldi was in there. Then I came out, and Annie Lennox walked past me, and it was
yeah,
just like, I was just
North
thinking, wow,
London. Come on.
North is North London. Yeah, what am I doing down south?
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
You're in the wrong part.
yeah. So that first film then with Chris was Insomnia, was it?
It was, yeah. He just
Yeah.
finished Memento, and he sold it, and it was being released, and had, I mean, he was getting a lot of notice, and then he took a studio film, Insomnia, with Warner Brothers, and then he needed a designer, and I went to meet him, and I got the job. I mean, he was probably interviewing a few people, but we got on pretty well straight away. So
And do you have an agent at that point that's kind of putting you forward for these projects, or was that
yeah,
just like a connection through someone
no,
else? Or
I had an agent. She put me up for the interview, and then I still remember vividly knocking on his apartment door. They weren't who they are now. They were living quite, you know, frugally in Midtown somewhere. And I knocked on his door. There's Emma and Chris. I went in and had a long chat, cup of tea, and I kind of brought. I always like do it on a lot of preparation. So I talked to him about the ideas of this sort of this endless day. that is Alaska. Um, so yeah, we got on really well. And it's like, where'd you grow up? And it was like, then we kind of connected in that meeting. It's like, you're joking. And he'd made the following on Bishop's Road on his street. So
Oh, really?
I said, that's hysterical because I know that. It's like, I know all those houses. And it was like,
Yeah.
and yeah, so we got on and we went up to Canada. I don't think he'd ever built any bigger sets. I started by building big sets. So I kind of, well, actually, I mean, we've skipped a long way to Chris Nolan, but there's a big,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
there's a big sort of build up to going to work for Tom Sanders, the designer. I was his art director on Braveheart and Assassins and a few other films, Mission Impossible 2. And then
John Woo, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, John Woo. And,
Yeah.
we went on to Ireland on Braveheart and, I was feeling like I needed to become a production designer because I kind of wanted to do my own thing, and they didn't really have any designers in Dublin, and they had a lot of small films going in. So I just stayed basically in Dublin. I left LA for 3 years and moved to Dublin, and I got to work with Barry Levinson came in, Joel Schumacher. Alan Bakula, I was only an art director on that, but he arrived with Gordon Willis, and so I became a designer there, and then eventually moved back to the States on a film with an Irish director, John Moore, on Behind Enemy Lines.
Yes.
And so I got to go back to LA as a designer. So that's, I mean, it was another sort of. I guess it's another sort of optimistic, naive move to think, oh, I'll just stay here.
What always amazes me about people like you that work as production designers or visual effects supervisors is you have to sort of become experts on so many different worlds, so many different genres. What an amazing job! A lot of people go into work, and I mean, I met up with some friends of mine I haven't seen from school the other week, and they're in the same jobs. They're in just after they left school. One's in banking, one's in computing, and it hasn't really changed a great deal for either of them. But the job that you do, you're in different countries, you're inventing, you're set designing for a Star Trek series, you're set designing for John Carpenter, and it's like, I mean, it's kind of insane that you have to become an expert on all of this stuff. Is that something that you really relish? You go proper deep dive head first straight into these worlds and immerse yourself?
Yeah, kind of, but it's exciting. Change. I can't really sit still. I think they have a name for that. And then so it's very exciting. Like, maybe we could do it here. It's like I find that you can get lost in the day, and it's just like the things. So long as when you're younger, it's stressful because it seems like an impossible thing to do everything, and then of course what you learn as an older person is like, you just tackle one thing at a time, So, and then you park things when you're not sure, you just park it and move on, and so you kind of
do something you do know.
Yeah, or just something you want to do, and you park the stuff that's your brain can't handle, and you don't. No point in sitting there spinning. But yeah, so I love that sort of trying to connect. It's like a giant visual jigsaw puzzle, and it was like I was saying earlier, the 3D thing in the head where I can actually manipulate something in 3D to try it without. I really like, and so weirdly, when we got 3D programs like Maya and Modo and Rhino, it was mind-blowing to me because finally something would move as fast as your head. You could spin around an object and change it. So the technology, when that arrived, it was like, oh my God, because the pencil, I'm already moved on the minute the pencil touches the paper. So to
Mm.
find a program is very hard to learn that could move with me. And especially when they invented the 3D mouse where you can spin around and navigate, it was like, oh, this is truly a joy. Um, and then, of course, they invented 3D printing, which means I wasn't stuck in my 2D computer screen. I could then
Mm.
print.
Mm.
And
Do you have 3D printers around you now? Like, have you got some in your place now? Have you?
yeah, I have three Ultimakers down in my basement. I used to have 17 when I was mad for it, but we used to print miniatures
Yeah.
because it
Well,
was
because
like,
I
let's
guess
just
the
print them.
miniature industry had kind of died almost by then as well, hadn't it? There weren't really many
Yeah.
model makers around. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's fantastic. You can try shapes. I think it was on Interstellar that it was like, okay, I've learned this 3D program. I use Modo, which is a designer's program. And then I went to Chris on the beginning when we were in early stages. We work in his garage, which is now an art room, which is now a house. It's slowly grown from his old two-car garage. Um, and I said, I'm going to use this 3D program to design this film. I really want to try it. And he said, well, I just got given this 3D printer. and it was like, well, let's plug it in. Let's give it a go.
Let's do it. Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
used to do lots of ranges. Like, can we find the shape of the ranges, draw, do it in 3D? And it was like, I don't know, I have to find the right button to press. the
Before
right
you had
tool
those
selection.
printers, though, sorry, yeah, before you had those printers, were you kind of doing like the thing that I hear from a lot of ILM folks, which is the kit bashing thing, just sort of joining
Oh, yeah.
toys and model kits together just to get something tangible and physical
Yeah.
and three-dimensional in your hands. Yeah.
That's how we did the Batmobile, is me and Chris in his two-car garage. I used to go to Toys R Us and fill up shopping trolleys of anything that seemed about right. And then we used to go down to Home Depot and buy shit.
Mm.
I always say we can't do that anymore because everyone knows who he is. But back then it was easy. That's how we did the Batmobile. There was no drawing of the Batmobile until after we designed it, and then there was
Oh,
a
really?
drawing. So
Interesting.
the actual design of it was done in 5 models, which we call the Mark 1 through 5.
Mm.
So I have the Mark 4, and Chris has the Mark 5.
I saw one of the real ones in, where was I? I was at Silverstone. I was working
Yeah.
on the Grand Prix there, and I came out of our sort of broadcast compound, and it was parked in our broadcast compound. I thought, what the heck is
Yeah.
that doing there? I think it
Well,
was just
Batman
being,
came to visit.
yeah, just being driven around the track for a show off. No, very cool
Doesn't
to
go that
see.
fast. It would only go 90 miles per hour, 95 maybe.
Yeah, well,
But
that's good enough.
it's
Then.
got a Chevy 350 in it, so
Do you get a real thrill from going from those toys bashed together to seeing the kind of what the team has come up with and built? The final
yeah. I mean,
product?
the bashing toys only gets you so far. Like you end up with a bandsaw and some plastics, and you end up having to actually you get an idea and then you make it. We used to make one half of it in plastics in Chris's garage, and if we liked it, we then you stick it into Photoshop and duplicate it the other half, and then you build the other half if you like it, or you move on. But yeah, once you get it, once special effects arrive because they built it from the ground up. Special effects are brilliant because you're like, they're engineers, and it's like they always come in, and there's lots of sort of they're not as optimistic as we are. They're pessimistic, which is good, and they're like
They know the reality of the situation. Yeah.
and they've got to build it from the ground up. So it takes Chris Corbell built it and his team, and
Oh yeah, I know Chris. Yeah, I interviewed him.
Yeah,
What did he worked on? One of the
Usually
Star Wars
James
shows, I
Bond.
think it must have been, or oh no, it was maybe it was Mission Impossible. Anyway, yeah,
he's brilliant. Like, he can make you anything.
he's
That's
certainly
my-
very matter of fact as well, isn't he? Like he
Yeah,
just
I like
gets it
him.
done, kind of. Yeah,
Yeah, and my thing is like I always say to producers, it's like whatever you do, whoever the special effects guy is, make sure their last name is Corbell. So, because he has a brother, Paul, and Neil, and so Paul was
Right.
on
Oh,
Dunkirk.
it was
and,
Neil I spoke to. Yeah.
yeah, I've never worked with Neil, only Chris. But Chris, they can build some stuff. So, and their workshop is very exciting because it's like crazy metalworking and engineering and trying stuff. Um, and so yeah. I mean, the Batman when he started building that from the ground up, and we'd go and see him, and then he'd test the rigs, and because it has no front axle, which was part of the problem.
Yeah, true. Of course, yeah.
And so, and that the amount of suspension and the amount to keep that upright without a front axle was very, very difficult because it also, it had to run around Chicago at high speed and also jump into the Batcave. So, and that's all real. So, and I got to drive the Batmobile in the early days, and
Did you? Yeah.
and it was like, this is fantastic.
Well, you've got the deep voice, you could do the Batman impression, I'm sure.
Yeah. We're going to do this. I know that's Bane, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you could do that instead, yeah. Well, we now know which side you fall on, yeah, the hero or the villain. But I would imagine, though, reading like a new Chris Nolan script, having worked with him previously, almost is of no advantage to a certain level, because each film he does is just another level of complexity, whether it's in the story or in the the design that he's looking for from you. I mean, that must be a hell of a challenge.
It is. He's usually he's actually very patient, and he wants I get invited in very early because he needs the visual input about how things should look. Because it really helps him continue, refine the script. So, but yeah, usually I don't understand the third act. It's usually like what, like Interstellar is like, sorry, we're in a fourth dimensional configuration of a fifth dimensional world, and it's like created by who, on the event horizon. It's like, what are we doing? It's like,
which you have to build. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I have to build, the Tesseract, which is like, again, that's a typical one where I'm going to park that. So park that over here and deal with, like, it's like, how do you even navigate to Saturn? You know what I mean? Like, because we've got to build the spaceship with all its instruments. So you got to think, it's like, oh, well, how do you navigate? But I kind of like that. But it's like, oh, we better speak to Kip Thorne about how we're going to get to Saturn and how does that look on a dashboard? It's crazy things like. But also when you're scouting, I do remember I go scouting with Chris. You were alone. I do remember we're on a United plane and he was like staring at the galley, and I was thinking, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm just looking at those trolleys they bring out. And it was like, I looked at them and I went, oh yeah. It's like space is about storage, and and so all the walls we got to go to a scrapyard and get all the freaking trolley doors, and that's the walls. There are no walls; they're all compartments. So
all cupboards.
Yeah, and so but then we went up and we were like, it's like, can we have a look at your trolleys? And they're very suspicious of us.
Yeah, I bet.
But that I think that's part of the excitement of design is like it's a discovery, and and Chris's scripts are complicated. Tenant was like one of those very complicated scripts, which I'd say that was by far the most confused I've ever been, because usually they play out sort of traditionally, and you get to something complicated or a device. And you sort of read it a few times, and it sort of becomes much clearer. Tenet was very odd because you have to see it from a point of view. Because if you're pushing against time, you're bringing time with you, and so therefore you are parallel with that moment in time. And it takes you a long time to understand the visuals of that.
Insanely complex.
Yeah, entropy and like reversal, and so. That was tricky because it sort of lives in the world of theory. Not that the Tesseract doesn't, but it was less complicated than Tenet, even though Tenet was set not on Earth. So,
I have to
And
say
then you
with
get
Tenet, what amazed
go
me
on.
was like I got as a viewer, I got to certain points where I was like, oh, I get it. Okay, I get it. And
Yeah,
just as you think you've got it, there's like another level, another layer, and you're
yeah,
sort of thrown into this, moment where you just think, am I not clever enough to watch this? I mean, that's
yeah.
probably what it's like reading the script for the first time for you, like where you think, okay, this makes sense, and then you read the next bit. Oh no, I'm back to
Well,
square one almost.
well, luckily, my naive optimism allows me to just go with it
You
and
just
not
you
ask too
and
many questions.
trust as well.
Yeah, and I'm just going to soak it up. Some
Mm.
people have a long list to come in and read. The script have a long list of really troubling. The questions trouble them. But to me, it's like you sort of go with it, and it's sort of cinema is like I can see that, but I can't see this bit. But even like I mean, I love some of the films we've made. Like The Prestige is one of my favorites because
Great film.
it's an illusion. From the minute it opens, it's just twists and turns, and there's two of them, and they tell you that in the first 10 minutes, they tell you that there's a twin, and you don't take it on board because it's very very clever, and I love watching that film.
Yeah, it's a really good film.
Yeah,
Again, it's sort of revealed before you, isn't it, in such a sort of tantalizing way. Like
yeah,
I think that I read something recently. If you want to be a good storyteller, like verbally, you should sort of tell the end first, like because
yeah.
then people are all in. People lean
Well,
in.
Tenon starts before it ends before it begins. So the
Mm,
explosion at Stars 12. And Michael Caine tells you this right at the beginning of the film. He goes, "There was an explosion somewhere in Eastern Europe, and that's Stars 12." So it actually it's already happened. And the Prestige I love because again Michael Caine says, "Are you watching closely?" And it's like, and I find all that just marvelous. I find that just I'm talking like I'm a fan, but
well, that's the sense I'm getting, Nathan. Like, and
yeah,
that's great because
yeah,
there was certainly probably a period of filmmaking where it was just kind of jobs for the boys kind of thing, and
yeah,
it was. But it's fantastic that this sort of second generation, third, fourth generation, however long it's been, of movie fans that are now creating the movies
yeah.
that we're watching, and have taken all of that stuff on board as they've grown up. And yeah, no, I think it's great to have fans working inside the industry because you're doing it for you as well as for
Yeah.
us. Yeah,
But also, I mean, I've opened a new door with these sort of musical fantasies, and who would have thought that door would open?
yeah,
And
amazing.
I've just it's woken me up. Really, it's like it's woken me up to a design that I didn't ever think that was something that I could sort of be part of.
Mm,
And I just like we just made Wicked, the Wizard of Oz. It's like
yeah.
we get to do
Oh,
Yellow Brick Roads, and
my daughters are desperate to see it. They've seen the stage show like 10 times. But that
but
here's a question then. So
yeah,
sorry to interrupt.
no,
I
no,
just
no,
had
no, no.
I've got
Yeah,
if I think of a
say it.
question, I have to say it. When you're creating like a world like Wonka and Wicked and even Batman, they're worlds that people already have an idea of, right?
Hmm.
There's already a sort of an established world there. Do you see that as sort of restrictive in a way, or do you say right, we're going all out, we're going to be different as possible? Like where is that kind of sweet spot for you?
Yeah, I don't sort of think of it as like what's gone before, or what we're going to do. I think of it as like, okay, this is again. It's like there's no point in like trying to compete with Gene Wilder, and I mean that's just brilliant. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to do that, and so we have to do our joyous, fantastical place. And the director often drives that. He says, "I want this to be whimsical, and I want to feel good," and so those kind of words really help me. And his script obviously helps me a lot. So it's like, yeah, let's make this joyous and like complicated. And with Wonka, it was like I want to mix Europe together, you know,
Right.
because uh, if you go to London and it's very Georgian and it's sort of weirdly sort of that period is very sort of military in a weird way. It's cold, and then you go to Switzerland and it feels fake. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
all the whimsical you need, but it's like
Mm.
I don't, it seems silly. Sorry if you're Swiss. But
You're right
then
though.
you
It
go
does.
to,
It feels Toy Townish, doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah, it feels like
Yeah.
it's chitty chitty bang bang,
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you kind of, then it's like, well, Belgium's pretty good. It's got all the detail you need. So you want this sort of whimsical detail in this wondrous place where the great chocolatiers live. But I want to feel like it goes back to like, I like the idea of nostalgia touching on something everyone knows. It's like we all learned to ride a bicycle, right? So you have a memory of going on down your
Yeah.
street, and everyone in the world has that memory.
Yeah.
Well, I hope they do. And so you can connect by the wheel turning, or you know what I mean. And so
Yeah.
how do you do that with architecture? It's like, you know, I love archways and I love shadow that they, so it was like, okay, I know how this should feel. I just have to combine everything. And,
Mm.
and the thing about Wonka is you can, like, no one, you're on a period film. people, people would have fits if I, like, I'm going to take the Charles Bridge. I'm going to take the Milan Grand Arcades. I'm going to take the Romanesque. I'm going to shove it
Yeah.
all
Yeah. Yeah.
together and
Yeah.
put a John Nash colonnade, in front of it. And it's like,
As you're sort
um,
of describing, colliding those worlds together, I'm sort of almost imagining a Hayao Miyazaki kind of Ghibli world almost, in
yeah,
the way that he takes sort of European influence in some of those like 80s, 90s films, like My Neighbor Totoro, and Kiki's Delivery
yeah,
Service is another one where you she's on a broom flying over this town, and it looks like French, Belgian, Swiss,
yeah,
German, sort of all mashed together, but has the sort of best elements of each, but still feels right. That's the thing as well, isn't it? Is making something feel right as well.
yeah. But they all connect weirdly. I don't know how, but it seemed to,
Mm.
and that was so much fun to combine it all. And the design challenge there was like, because you want to feel like it's sort of, you know, I mean, I
Mm.
know that the story is driven to the chocolatiers are evil, but you want it to feel like it has all this sort of history and, this great, it's going to be the greatest experience ever. And of course, when he gets there, it's not.
Mm.
He's got to fix it. And,
Mm.
and so, yeah, I mean, that was a different kind of fantasy because, you do a period film, where you do like, well, having said that, we made the Prestige in downtown LA.
Did you?
Yeah, we built one
Mm.
set because we didn't have much money.
Right.
So we did it. Well, that's not exactly true. We used the New York backlot and then we built one set on a soundstage, but and the rest was downtown because it had all the theaters. So
Mm.
you're sort of tasked with giving an impression of the period. So creating Wonka was to give that impression of his time that he lived in. And the theories I didn't really care too much about the actual time. It was sometime in the late 40s. To me, it was irrelevant. It was just about creating this whimsical world that he had thought he wanted to be in since his childhood. Um, uh, the period thing is again, it's about silently giving everyone a feeling that that place is his reality. So which are long words for me, Jamie.
I've watched a lot of your movies in the last couple of weeks, and I said to my wife, I wish the real world looked like this. It's just, I wish people put that much effort into design in the real world. I was going to ask you a question about, I've spoken to people before who worked in production design, and they've talked about, directors like John Carpenter who would, the budget would be so tight that he would say, right, I literally need a room with a door here and a door there and a window. And the production designer would say, well, what about on the reverse? Well, we're not going to see that, And Joe Alves famously tells this story where I think it's in Escape from New York. If Carpenter had panned like 6 inches to the left, you would have seen a cactus in the desert because they didn't even have a sound
Yeah.
stage. They just built it in the desert. Do you prefer working for a director who has that vision so locked down that he tells you he know, or you have that discussion to only build what is needed, or do you prefer to sort of build a world that they can discover and improvise in?
Build a world that they can discover. I mean, I think sure, John Carpenter, Hitchcock would was so precise that they could do that. I don't think modern filmmaking, the cameras used to be really heavy, so
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, so there was you couldn't really move them, so there was, and the
Mm.
lights didn't move. But now there are tools that allow us to like do anything you really want, including the lighting systems. I like to create the world because I want to put people there and the actors there, and I think with Chris, he's very precise, but he uses an IMAX camera, which is like, which creates is like, you gotta make sure everything's there. Plus, he might want to turn around, and it's a sort of, again, for him, it's a voyage of discovery, like a lot of directors. It's like, I don't know, they might want to turn around, and if they do, or they might, there's so many elements, like the sun might move, and it's like, oh shit, we got to turn around, or an actor might, say, whatever, he would say, I'd rather do it this way over here, and there's all these variables. So you give them. I like to give them a place that they don't have to think about, and take that off the table.
Yes.
Now, sometimes with budgets, you can't do that. Like on the Prestige, it was difficult because we only had certain angles. We had limited angles, but we had to work within, because our budget was very low, 20 million below the line, which isn't a lot to do that kind of film. But on the bigger films, like, I mean, listen, there are always budget problems on any level of film. So,
Of course. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you go to the budget level, so and that is your fight, and it's your choices. It's like you got to sit around a table and say you can have 5 of the 7, and of course everyone wants 7 of the 7, and
Yeah.
this is part of production design. As I think John Box used to say, you have to design the production, which means you make the choices. Like, you go on location because they serve the story and they serve your themes, and you push them to locations for certain things because, one, they serve the story, and 2, you don't want to build them because that's not buildable, or you can't do something else. So you have to help them design the film by showing them the way forward. So it's and also, you do it selfishly, so that you have to, down the road, you're going to have to make this stuff, and you say, well, we can get that on location. Let's go and do that. Unless you're growing 9 million tulips, and then and then you can only film
that's
there
insane.
in April.
That is absolutely insane. That's the thing, isn't it? That I'm always struck by. I've been a movie nerd all my life, ever since I saw
Yeah.
like the making of Star Wars, age 4 or whatever it was, and I've always been kind of intrigued and obsessed with the lengths that you go to achieve what you want to achieve in a movie. Like, wasn't there that thing where you had to cut down like miles of road signs to fit the spaceship down the road? I mean, it's for Interstellar. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
20
and I
miles.
think of like and like Robert Watts on Raiders of the Lost Ark. They had to remove like 1,000 TV aerials because they were all in shot. You just think I'm just not one of those people, I don't think, that could see that as achievable. I just go, okay, right, back her up. We're going to have to go somewhere else.
But it's born out of usually it's born out of a mistake, because like the Ranger, to get the proportions right, I wanted to make it a certain width, and unfortunately it was wider than the Icelandic road on the low loader. We were going to move it overnight anyway. John, who runs transport out there, who I've worked with many times, Jon, is this hardy bloke, was like, it's like, he says, oh yeah, it's too wide to go down the road. And I go, oh shit, how are we going to get it to the glacier? And he goes, oh, just cut the sign.
We'll solve that problem later. Yeah.
I'll put them back, and
Yeah.
I love those. It's kind of why I like a lot of the crew across the board, film crew, because they're real can-do people. And it's like, then don't look at the negatives of it. They look at like, well, we'll just give it a go. This is my first spaceship I've built. So weirdly, the Ranger was we had to build a slightly smaller one to get to Iceland because it had to fit into a 747 cargo ship in parts. So we could, we did an 80% one to get it out there and for crane sizes to lift it in and out of the water and onto the glacier. And so if you look at the film at the back, there's this funny little box because the actors have to step into that when the wave's coming and then the door has to close. And of course, at 80% doesn't give you the head height. So it was like, there was a funny little box under it. And, all those kind of oddities that you say, wow, we'll probably get away with that. So,
yeah. But being able to visualize as you do in 3D must be such a valuable tool to sort of be on a location and imagine what you're building in your head in that place.
Yeah,
and,
it's like,
it's really the future in your brain.
Yeah, it's like so brilliant. And now we have AI, which like can move fast too. So, but it's very 2D, which
is that creeping into your world?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Stuff,
yeah. I mean, how do I describe? I use AI. In fact, I've got it on my screen. I use Discord and Midjourney, but I use it. The thing about design is you have to get through all the bad ideas to get to the good ones, and we are limited in the time we have in pre-production. So you can get down to get to TARS, for instance, we had to go into all the through the humanoid robots, and then through all the Star Wars, R2D2 dustbin type, non-humanoid, all those two parallel to find TARS, who doesn't sit in either. So we had to get through all of those, and we spent a long time like trying to design humanoid and non-humanoid robots to get to the decision is like, oh, it can't be either. And the great thing about AI is you can now, I feel like it's like a time machine. I can jump through that very quickly because I can experiment with stuff I don't want. It tells me all the no's, and then I know
you
where
can
I
get
should
to
go.
the nose quicker. So you're not leapfrogging necessarily, but because I'm part of getting to the point where you get the right thing is that you have gone through all the wrong things, right?
Yeah, you have
but
to
this
get
is
rid of
speeding
all
up that process.
Yeah, but I can do it. Yeah, exactly.
Removing that process. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I think that's the worry that people have of AI in the creative world is that it's going to take that sort of iterative process away. So the thing that you arrive at isn't going to be what you would have arrived at if you'd taken the longer process. But
I mean, maybe
it's the difference between. I mean, you could even argue that I'm holding a pencil up here that if you did it with an Apple Pencil, that you're sort of leapfrogging to a certain, or you're speeding up the process to a certain extent.
Yeah, but it was like 3D and the pencil, like I said earlier. Yeah, I could sketch this stuff out. But it's one view, and I want to see 50 views. And so I can roll around something. And AI just allows me to move through all the things I don't want to do. Like for instance, if you're designing whatever, or a Star Wars prequel or whatever, what's been before you. So you have to get over all your preconceptions and, all your geeky stuff, including all your art department's preconceived ideas of what it should be to get there. And so if we can leapfrog that and then start to develop it from a further point in the future, what would have been the future, because we are time crunched, we get less and less time to prepare films. And so it's and once you start building it, because you're running a big construction crew, it's very hard to maneuver it into something you want. And, you often end up with like, I'm disappointed with that set.
Too much
and
of a compromise.
I knew it was wrong when I started, but I couldn't find the right answer. So I like AI. It's just another tool. It's like you said earlier, it's another tool. And I don't think it's going to solve, it's not going to, I honestly don't think it's going to, I think people are going to use it to help them. And I just feel like it's going to be another useful thing. I don't know where the film version of it's going. I do think it's a sea change. I think it's probably more than the sea. I mean, I remember these sea changes when Photoshop came in. It was like in the early 90s, it was like, what is that? And can you teach it? Can you teach it to me? And then 3D came in, 3D printing came in, the effects came in. So I think it's just, it might be bigger than that, all of those, and it might be a sort of silent to sound moment. But I don't know yet. Who knows, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people in my part of the industry, we're editing stuff very quickly and getting it back out to air, whether it's in sport or light entertainment or
Yeah.
whatever. And I think a lot of people initially thought that AI would jump straight in and start doing that editing for us. But one of the things, I work for a company called EVS who make production servers like for replays and highlights and things. And one of the things they've just introduced, which I was demoing at NAB for them, was frame interpolation. So turning a standard camera into like a 3-phase, 150 frame camera or more if you send it again, but in a turnaround that is quick enough to get it to air in time.
Wow.
But then you end up with an inherent blur, so they're now working on a de-blur for that, and it looks. I mean, it's incredible. It's like the other day, some load of friends of mine who work in motorsport flew out to Abu Dhabi to work on some autonomous racing, and one of the guys, the camera guys, he's let's say he's touching 70. He's been doing it for a very long time, and I said, I thought they were going to replace you first, not the drivers, And it's interesting where AI is going, not necessarily in the places that you expect. But yeah, you're right, it is a tool, and I think people are just worried about the sort of abuse of it, aren't they? Or there's a sort of, I don't want to use the word snobbery, but I guess there's a certain feeling about the purity of that blank page and that pencil, and having the boldness to start something, from nothing.
But I mean,
but you're working in an industry where you've got to do things quickly and make money, right? And make a great design at the same time.
I mean, weirdly, what I found is like when I've used it to mix illustrations of things together because I like bits of them, so I just blended them, and it gives me something that is actually our work that's blended together. There's something new, and oddly, the weirdest thing is the translation. Like, I feel like I need an old school art director to because it's very 2-dimensional and it's a feeling. The AI thing is like based on paintings and emotion, and they draw down. So to translate anything that comes out of AI into something physical, you need an old school art director who understands that translation period, which is, in a weird way, it makes art direction more important because the old school art direction is the journey of making something and sculpting it in 3D from something that's quite sketchy. So it makes it into, rather than 3D is made as very precise, exactly how it should look, and with previs and all that stuff. Whereas AI actually takes us back in one way and allows old school art direction to become more positive, which is a process in itself. Like a great old art director and can find the set and find shape and tone by making it, and that art is lost over the years because of 3D. So things it changes. Everything changes. Everything in certainly my career has changed constantly. So and this is another one. But at the same time, it's like, it's also exciting. It's another exciting thing. It's like, because you sometimes it's like, oh, that looks shit, so won't go that way.
yeah.
So,
And I think it's always important as well when you're using AI is always to say please, just in case they do take over one day and they are our masters. I genuinely do on ChatGPT. I'm very, very polite to it. As a last question, because goodness, we've already been talking for an hour and a half nearly. You mentioned like designing a Star Wars prequel when you were just sort of giving an example back then. Is that on the wish list, like designing a Star Wars? Do you have a wish list?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to do. It's funny. I always thought I wanted to do James Bond and a Star Wars in my early career, but of course, that isn't what you want. It's like I was weirdly like. It's like a door open, something open. Like Wicked was such a design challenge, and I would equal it to Interstellar. I'd say Wicked and Interstellar are the biggest design challenges I've ever had, and so I find those films fascinating. So I'd like to do a science fiction. I know I want to do fantasy and science fiction. I kind of. I've sort of, I don't need to do. I don't think I need to do a period film. But I say that, but then someone did
Who knows
something
what might
about
come along?
oil running in the Mexican Revolution with Standard Oil. That would be, that could be really interesting. So,
Mm.
I don't know. I guess I'm talking about design and story. Like, it's what I do know as I get older. It has to be a challenge, otherwise, and I need to not have done something before. So, um, as I always remember on Braveheart when we were doing the Gates of York, I was an art director, and my job was to build the Gates of York and the walls, and also the battering ram with the help of special effects because it had to be pushed and stopped, and so we built this road and battering ram with huge gates. I always remember Mel Gibson coming up to me and goes, "Nathan, is this battering ram going to work?" And I can't remember whether I said it or thought it, and it's like, I have no idea. This is my first battering ram. I don't know. I probably thought it because I was too scared to say that to him. But I definitely, it crossed my mind. It's like, no, this is the first one I've ever done.
Amazing. I mean, I think that's a perfect way to end this conversation in a way. Not that I want to end it because I'm having a great time, but you're sort of finishing with that same sort of optimism, like, who knows what might come along next that you had when you initially started in the industry. That's amazing that it's not driven you into the ground just yet, Nathan.
No, I'm really excited, and like I said, I've had one of the most challenging design jobs I've ever had in my life just recently, and it woke me up. As much as Interstellar woke me up, Wicked has woken me up to the sort of joy of design again. So occasionally you need a nudge. So you don't want to be the old fart in the garage saying, "Oh, you need a R2158 bolts to make that."
And that's out in I think that's out in November, isn't it? Wicked.
Yeah, it's going to be. I mean, it's like you said, I have 3 girls and 1 boy, and the girls have always wanted. My wife works with me, us to do a musical, and now we're finally doing musicals.
Amazing. I mean, God, I advise everyone who's listening just to go through Nathan's list of movies on IMDb and just acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of movies you would love in there and you would regard in your top 50 of all time. I think what a career you've had, and it's still super strong, and you're rising to new heights. So all power to you, mate. I think that's great.
Yeah. Nice talking to you, Jamie.
Yeah, you too. Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation there with Nathan. Great guy, great chat. Really did feel comfortable chatting to Nathan, really easy to talk to, and looking forward to speaking to him again. Hopefully we're going to be interviewing a few production designers for our Joe Alves doco. We've got some good news happening on that front at the moment. Can't say anything at the moment, but we are moving on. We are moving forward. Coming up on the podcast, I have ILM camera assistant Marianne Evans, ex-Lucasfilm fan relations officer and owner of the world's largest Star Wars collection, Steve Sansweet, VFX guru Ty Ruben Ellingson, costume designer Aggie Rogers, and I'm still trying to get the big hitters, Ben Burt, John Goodson, Joe Johnston. I'm working with the folks at Lucasfilm to try and snag them. Oh, and I shouldn't forget, I also have that 3-hour conversation that I recently had a couple of weeks ago with production designer Nilo Rodis Jamiro. Second time we've chatted. Oh my God, so many great stories in there. Just that man's had a hell of a life and career. Can't wait to get that one out to you. It's going to take some editing though. We did talk for 3 hours. Please support the podcast if you can, or watch it collapse like a flan in a cupboard. Seriously, your support is needed. Just a tenner. Go on. It's a tenner. It's like, two coffees. And that's for a whole year. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.
Well, we used to look up in the sky and wonder at our place in the stars. Now we just look down and worry about our place in the dirt.